Well, hey everyone, once again, we want to welcome you to your Life Group Leader Training video. This week, we are beginning our series in Hosea. So if you haven't had time to begin reading through that book, I highly encourage you, go ahead and stop this video now. Go spend some time with the Lord, spend some time in Hosea. Our passage for this week is Hosea Chapter 1, but I encourage you to go ahead and read through at least chapter 3 so that you can see the story of Hosea and Gomer. And I also want to encourage, and better yet, challenge you to go watch the video from our friends at the Bible Project that they've created on the book of Hosea. I'm going to be sending it in your weekly email. You'll find an attachment listed there. Go ahead and watch that video. I think you'll be surprised at how helpful it is for understanding the big picture of the book of Hosea and exactly what Hosea is seeking to do in writing to the people of Israel. But this week, we're in Hosea Chapter 1. Hosea Chapter 1. Go ahead and read that if you haven't. But as we think about this passage, I want you to imagine that you are Hosea. And you're living in the northern kingdom of Israel in a time where there is political and religious turmoil. And this is a time where you look around and all you see is injustice, all you see is evil, all you see is idolatry, and the very things that the Lord hates. Because the governing leaders in Israel, they've made allies with two very corrupt, evil nations, Assyria and Egypt. They've made allies with these nations, and these nations have demanded that the people of Israel worship their gods. And so not only have the people of Israel made allies with very corrupt, broken nations, but they've also turned to those nations' gods, and they're worshiping those gods. They've turned away from Yahweh. And you're Hosea. You're living in this time. You're a prophet in this time. You've been called to speak out against this. And then, in the midst of your prophecy, in the midst of your time as a prophet, the Lord comes to you, and He tells you something crazy. He tells you to go and find what He calls a harlot or a prostitute, or the Hebrew would indicate someone who was bound for harlotry, someone who was going to be an adulteress. Hosea is called to go find that person and to marry them. And God calls Hosea to marry this woman named Gomer. And Gomer proves to be exactly what the Lord said she would be. We're told here in chapter 1 that she has a child that's given to her from Hosea. But in the next two children she has, we aren't told they're from Hosea. And that's important. What Hosea is telling us is that those children were not his. And so Hosea is betrayed by Gomer. She's proven to be unfaithful. You can imagine the heartache, the shame, the brokenness that Hosea would have felt over this relationship. And imagine you're Hosea, and as you're thinking about your relationship with Gomer, as you're thinking about the brokenness and the heartache that this relationship has caused you, you begin to think about the Lord. And you begin to think about Israel. And suddenly, you realize that the very heartache that you feel over Gomer's betrayal is the heartache that God feels over the betrayal of Israel. Hosea learns personally how it is that God feels about Israel's sin. He learns that God isn't just angry over their sin. He's not just upset, but that He's broken, that His heart has been broken because of their sin. And so Hosea writes to the people of Israel to show them that very truth, to show them that God's heart is broken by sin, even specifically that God's heart is broken by their sin. And that's exactly what Hosea wants to show us. That's exactly what Hosea wants us to feel. In fact, it's what he wants us to feel. It's his main intention and point for his whole book, to show us that God loves us deeply and his heart breaks when we turn from him. And so this week, as you're diving into this kind of strange, obscure book of prophecy emphasize this point, that sin breaks the heart of God. That the sin in our life breaks God's heart because God is deeply involved and deeply loves us, that when we turn from Him, it breaks His heart. What's also important about this story is that it ends in verse 11 in chapter 1. It ends with hope. It shows us that the people of Israel have hope for restoration, and that hope is only found in God. That God is the one who loves them, and God is the one who will eventually provide healing to their brokenness. And so this week, as we're thinking about sin, as we're emphasizing this truth that God's heart is broken over sin, we want you to challenge your group to respond to sin in a healthy and biblical way. Our tendency is to respond to sin in shame, to respond to sin in regret, to beat ourselves up. But the biblical text shows us, the story of Hosea shows us, that when we sin, instead of running and hiding from God, God is the very one we should run to. That He's the one who can provide healing. And so challenge your group that this week, when they fail, this week when they sin, instead of hiding in shame, to run to the Father, who is the one who can provide healing. Well, guys, that's our main idea for the week. That's our weekly challenge for the week. We are praying for you. We hope you have a great time with your group, and we will see you soon.